The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jolene Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Fundamentals of Compliance in the Food and Beverage Industry, ISO 22000, SQF and BRC, presented by Kevin DeVici of Bimser International. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment after the presentation to answer our one survey question. And as a reminder, our 2021 SWK Virtual Empower Conference is coming up on May 4th through 6th. Be sure to register to learn how to get the most out of your Sage ERP. The registration link will be sent in the webinar follow-up email, and I'll include it in the webinar chat. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kevin. Kevin, I think you might be on mute.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Jolene, for introductions. Much appreciated. Great, so thank you for joining today's webinar session, Fundamentals of Compliance in the Food and Beverage Industry. My name is Kevin DeVici. I am the Managing Director of Bimser International. I am very excited to be with you today, and we have actually an agenda to share with you, and we will follow this agenda throughout this webinar. So today we'd like to start with introductions, and we'll also talk about the purpose of compliance in food and beverage industry. We'll talk about what type of quality management systems and requirements in food and beverage industry nowadays, especially for ISO 22000, SQF, BRC, and good manufacturing practices point of view. And I will also discuss 7 top compliance challenges in food and beverage industry and some ideas to improve health and safety compliance operations in food and beverage industry in this day of age. And we'll also finalize with Q&A, question and answer session. I know you have many questions in your mind. I also received some of the questions before we start the webinar, so I'll address your questions during Q&A session, and I hope you find this webinar to be informative. First of all, let's start with introductions, who we are and what we do. Our company, Bimser International, is an enterprise software maker since 1998. We are based in New York. We are an ISP partner of SWK Technologies, so we have been partnered with them, with SWK, and we work closely together. And we will appreciate this opportunity to be in this webinar, to be able to share educational content with you. As an organization, we simply help companies simplify their business processes and adapt organizations with digital transformation. We are a global organization. We are based in New York. We also have presence in Europe and Middle East. We are a group of organizations, and we are about 300 people, and we are growing internationally as well as nationally. And we are active in many different ecosystems, as you see on the slide. As for quality management system, we are also ISO 9001 certified, ISO 27000 certified, and ISO 15504 certified. So quality management system is in our soul as an organization, and we take it very seriously. And continuous improvement is also in core of our organization. So what we'll be talking about today in food and beverage industry point of view is something that we follow every single day from the point of quality management and continuous improvement. As I mentioned, we are an enterprise software maker. We have our own technologies, so that is actually what we do since 1998. We are experienced in workflow management, asset and maintenance management, quality and compliance management, and as well as business process modeling and performance management. So that is all we do. We are a specialist, and we have been doing this since 1998. Having said that, since 1998, we deployed many different projects. So quality management is one of our expertise. So far, we have deployed more than 1,000 projects. So that means we have worked with more than 1,000 organizations, just like yourself, in food and beverage industry and other industries as well. So quality management and quality management digitization is one of our expertise areas. We have many different reputable and world-class customers working with us, using our software products every single day. So they put their confidence and their trust in our company and in our products. So in terms of verticals and expertise areas, we have experience in many different industries. However, we take food and beverage industry, and we have a lot of experience in that as well. When we look at food and beverage industry, many of our customers, they comply with SQF, BRC, ISO 22000, good manufacturing practices, FDA, and many other requirements. So our expertise area, based on our expertise area, based on our own quality management system, basically help us learn a lot about food and beverage industry. So today, our presentation will be more on the practical side. So we kept the content educational, but we'll talk about the quality management requirements. And we also talk about what we have been seeing in the marketplace when companies are trying to comply with those standards. And we'll come up with some ideas and suggestions for you to consider. So the concept and the content of this presentation is very practical, and we focus on the fundamentals and practices of compliance in food and beverage industry. First of all, let's talk about compliance a little bit. So why do we comply in food and beverage industry as well as other industries? So compliance is very important for every single company. And for us, it's actually a mindset. So why do we comply? Well, first of all, for safety and security of public, customers, vendors, our employees, for their safety, we comply with those quality management and compliance requirements. And our customers require it. Our customers, they are very demanding in that sense. So customers require organizations, especially in food and beverage industry, to be compliant in certain quality management standards. Sometimes that's ISO 22000, sometimes that's SQF, sometimes that's BRC. But customers are demanding in that sense. Also in the marketplace, to be more practical, our competitors offer it as well. So while we are processing or making any food and beverage product, for example, we have to have a certain quality management system in place, and we have to comply with certain federal, local, and state regulations. But at the same time, we have to also look for the competition to satisfy customers as well as to be competitive in the marketplace. Also, another reason that we comply with different quality management systems is to improve business processes so that we can have a continuous improvement in place. We can enter new markets. Some of the markets that we try to aim, they require certain quality management standards for us to comply. Sometimes we already comply, and that's something as an advantage to enter different markets. We also differentiate our company in the marketplace by compliance. We can also enable best practices. And from the practical point of view, in terms of business, is to help our company have a business continuity and sustainability in place. And I'll talk about details in a minute as to what I mean as for continuity and sustainability. So what are the typical quality and compliance management requirements in food and beverage industry? So in this presentation, we'll mostly talk about ISO 22000, SQF, and good manufacturing practices. BRC, as we know it, is actually very similar to SQF as for compliance requirements, even though governed by different body. There are similarities in the marketplace, and I'll talk about those in a minute as well. So let's talk about what do we see in the marketplace. First of all, ISO is very, very common. ISO is actually the holy grail of all the quality management systems in the world. So ISO is actually an international organization, and they are it's actually based in Switzerland, and it's been active since 1946. So it's been actually developing quality management standards for a long time. And there are right now more than 20,000 international standards available in different subjects in technology, in manufacturing, including food as well. So that's actually widely known worldwide organization for standards, especially for quality standards. So ISO has certain principles that actually it publishes. It's a public knowledge. I also put the source in the bottom. So these quality management principles actually applicable for all the quality management practitioners, regardless of what you comply. You are complying with ISO 22000, you are complying with SQF, BRC, or you are practicing other quality management standards. These quality management principles applicable to all of them. So everything starts with customer, first of all. We need to think of customers' health, safety. Also, we need to think about customers' satisfaction. So we need to make sure we satisfy customers' requirements. That's actually what the quality is. So if you ask me what the quality is, I need to quote Philip Crosby. So basically, quality is what customer asks and how you conform to it. That is what quality is. So there is no bad quality or good quality. That the quality is basically how you satisfy customers' requirements. If you satisfy it, then that's a good quality product, that's a good quality service. So in that sense, we need to be customer focused. In addition, leadership is very important, as we all know. We need directions. We need also leadership as to show us the way, keep us motivated, keep the organization motivated, and show us the right direction so that we put our efforts in the right direction to move forward towards customer satisfaction and continuous improvement. Engagement of people. So people may be our stakeholders, people may be our suppliers, people may be communities that we are engaging with. So we need to be engaged. We need to be in engagement with the people around our organization based on ISO quality management principles to make sure we have good relationship, and also we create good for the community as well as for the market. Process approach. So based on ISO, every single activity that we have is actually based on processes. So we basically slice and dice what we do in our organization, and we basically manage them. We call them processes, and we manage them process by process. That's what it means. So when we are processing food and beverage, how we are handling raw materials, that's purchasing. That's a process. How do we handle our relationship with suppliers? How do we audit them? How do we make sure they actually follow our instructions? That is another process that we need to handle as for supply relations. How do we process it? How actually we put controls in place? These are different processes as well that we need to make sure we are following the guidelines as per our quality management system and regulations. Improvement, number 5, is very important. So regardless of what we comply, ISO 22000, SQF, BRC, continuous improvement is critical. At the end of the day, there is always room for improvement, and we need to always look for opportunities to improve our business processes so that we'll have customer satisfaction, and most of all, we'll have a safe and secure work environment, and as well as products that we actually offer as food and beverage to marketplace. Evidence-based decision making. So based on ISO quality management principle, from the managerial point of view, we need to make decisions based on evidence. So evidence means records. So the record keeping is very important in that sense. So we can actually run analysis, we can go through the evidence, the data, and we can make decisions based on the evidence that we have on hand. And we'll talk about record keeping in a minute as well, as for how it is important for us to make correct and right decisions. And relationship management. So we need to manage relationships in our organization and around our organization, customers, vendors, stakeholders, communities, and other relationships that we need to be managing for our organization's operations, as well as to make sure we improve our business process. That's critical. So when we think about ISO, the most important and the most common one is called ISO 9001. ISO 9001 is the most widely practiced quality management system in the world. Right now in the world, based on the information that we put together, there are more than 1 million companies and organizations, more than 170 countries certified by ISO 9001. So this quality management system is actually applicable to any industry, regardless of the size of the organization. And it basically helps companies follow the quality management principles that I just talked about in my previous slide, in terms of being customer focused, making decisions based on evidence, having safe and secure environment as for producing safe products, and also having a safe work environment for our employees and our communities as well. And ISO 22000 is actually built on ISO 9001 principles. So basically, when we look at ISO 22000, that helps organizations minimize food risk and improve performance when they are actually operating in food and beverage industry. So it has a framework for food safety management. That is actually an really industry focused, food and beverage focused approach. I'll talk about it in the next slide. And it applies to many different organizations directly and indirectly involved in food and beverage operations and businesses, basically, especially if you are manufacturing, if you are processing food, if you are in logistics of food. Any part of directly or indirectly involvement in food industry actually requires ISO 9001, ISO 22000 compliance. That's very helpful. So I also need to talk about the similarities with ISO 9001. So first of all, the internal, external issues, the interested parties, the context of organization is the same when we think about ISO 22000. The control of document and information. So I just actually talked about a minute ago about record keeping. So why do we keep records, especially in food and beverage industry? As for operations, keeping records are very important. So it's actually, it can be actually traceable. So if there is any, let's say, recall, if there is any issues, we can actually trace it back to the beginning of the process as to, you know, where it is starting from the seed to fork, as they call it. So we can have a traceable record keeping system in place. So first of all, for traceability, it's very important. Also, it is important to have a quality management system in place with policies, procedures, instructions, and guidelines. So these guidelines, policies, and instructions actually form the foundation of the quality management system. Also, another similarity to 9001 from the point of ISO 22000 is basically addressing risks and opportunities and having objectives in place to make sure the performance of the organization meets the expectations. That is another similarity. When we look at ISO as a whole, there is plan, do, check, act cycle. It is also called Deming cycle, a quality guru in the history of quality. However, when we look at ISO 22000 base plan, do, check, act cycle, as I'm sharing on screen right now, it is actually specifically designed for food industry. So when we are planning, actually, so we don't think in general right now, we think specifically for food and beverage industry. So first of all, we need to plan food safety. Everything starts with safety and security of the environment as well as the product around it. So we need to have a traceability system in place, as I mentioned earlier, so that from beginning to end, our product, we need to know where the raw material coming from, when it was actually delivered to our organization, how it was handled, how it was processed, how it was actually shipped out, so that if there is any issue, then we can always trace it back to the core of the problem to find the root cause. We also need to have certain hazard control plans in place to make sure we mitigate the risk. We assess the risk, we mitigate the risk, and we actually are performing in a proactive way to make sure when we implement our food safety plan, we can also have the controls in place and we can monitor. Another important thing is to basically make sure we have the check in place in terms of food safety. We need to verify our activities. We need to have audits periodically. Audits are critical so that we'll make sure we follow the instructions and guidelines that we put together in the beginning. And also in terms of our operations, everything is according to the ISO 22000 guidelines as well as other local and state regulations. So this cycle actually is sort of a loop in a way. So from planning to planning, doing, checking, and acting, and we keep doing this and running these for continuous improvement in the scope of food and beverage industry. And the priority here is to have a safe and secure work environment, and the products that we produce, we deliver food, is actually safe for our customers, for our vendors, and anyone around our product. We comply with ISO 22000 to improve health and safety, improve customer satisfaction, and also it is important to have transparency, especially in the scope of traceability, so that our products can be recorded and can be traced anytime there is a need. Also, if there is a need for investigation, if there is an incident or if there is an audit, for example, this type of system that we have, ISO 22000, can help you find the root cause if there is an issue. So you can also get your records quickly as possible. You can make decisions based on the evidence, and you can improve your business processes accordingly. Another quality management system, which is very common in food and beverage industry, is called SQF. SQF is also commonly known worldwide. However, based on our experience, based on what we see in the marketplace, it's heavily in North heavily used and applied in North America. As for SQF, that's actually that stands for Safe Quality Food Program, and that is basically designed to help you have a food safety and quality program for retailers, for food service companies, and other brand owners, basically. And it has a very rigorous program from farm to fork, as I mentioned. So traceability is key as well for SQF. And based on SQF, there are different certifications, there are different levels, and each level has certain details. For example, if you are in level 1, that's for low-risk products, and basically for food and safety controls in place. Typically, most of the organizations, as we see in the marketplace, they're either in level 2 or level 3. Depends on what they are handling. So when you're in level 2, basically, you are also implementing a hazard program as well, in addition to your current food and safety control. So your safety control plans are more rigorous. So that actually touches to the HACCP requirements, HACCP system that actually being followed in food and beverage industry. That stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Endpoint. That's basically, that was actually found by NASA in 1960s. So now it is actually a preventive food safety program for manufacturers, for food storage companies, as well as distribution organizations. It also has different principles in the scope of good manufacturing practices, which I'll talk about in a minute. It is to basically conduct a hazard analysis, identify critical control points to make sure there is a safe and secure food processing environment, establishing critical limits of each critical control point in detail for safety purposes, as well as having corrective actions in place. So it also refers to ISO from the beginning, as I mentioned earlier. So we have the corrective actions in place for continuous improvement. That's number 5 from quality principles of ISO. So we always have corrective actions and improvement in place while we are trying to have the best safe and secure environment for food processing and delivery. Another one, for example, that we need to focus in these principles is procedures to make sure the system is actually running as intended. That actually touches audits. I'll also talk about audits in a minute. There are different audits that we'll be actually performing for quality management purposes. And also record keeping. Both SQF, HACCP, ISO, so they talk about, they have some similarities in terms of record keeping. They talk about record keeping. They also talk about corrective actions for continuous improvement. They also talk about making sure actually we are following the instructions of our quality management system to make sure our system actually working as intended. That actually touches to audit. So that is also another thing that we need to think about, whether we are compliant with SQF or similarly BRC, which is a more European version of SQF, but managed by a different body, is actually basically have the safe and secure work environment and the products are safe that we deliver as food and beverage. Some of the requirements, major requirements of SQF, for example, we need to have the management commitment. That part is also very similar to ISO. Without management commitment and leadership, we cannot actually run our quality management system. So once we have the management commitment in place, the document controls and records, we need to have that system in place. How do we put together our policies? How do we put together our instructions for our team members? And also guidelines. That's actually what we need to detail. And once we detail as to how we are going to be performing these tests, then we need to make sure all the documents and records are in certain format and certain versions. What do I mean by version is from time to time, we need to update our guidelines, our policies, our procedures, for example, because of continuous improvement. So you produce food in one way, but later you find it in another way. It's more maybe productive. For safety or security or maybe operationally, now your instructions change. So instead of producing orange juice in one way, now you need to do it in another way. So the instructions to make that production happen will be also changing in your documents. It's called versioning. So while you are keeping the previous version, you need to also you need to have the current version in place, so your team members, production team members, quality control team members follow those instructions accordingly. That is why record keeping is very important in the scope of versioning. Also, version helps you understand the evolution of your quality management system as well. So how you were doing your production 5 years ago, how you are doing it now. So what is the change in this sense? So you can also see the evolution in your organization as well. But in terms of operations, your team members, they have to see the latest version of your policies and procedures in place. Other requirements of SQF, as we know, for example, food safety plans. How do we ensure we have a safe work environment? How do we make sure if there is any problem, we can trace our production steps? Also, we need to have approved supplier program. So having responsible suppliers, having suppliers with quality management system in place is critical. As I mentioned earlier, why do we comply with different quality management systems? Because our customers require, in addition to have a safe and secure work environment. So we also need to be really demanded. Companies really demand in the marketplace in food and beverage industry to make sure the suppliers actually following certain quality management system in place. So if you are complying with SQF, for example, it is very common for SQF compliant food and beverage companies to ask their suppliers to be SQF compliant as well. Either maybe level 2 or level 2 or level 1 type of certification is critical. If you are compliant with ISO 22000, you can ask the same question to your vendors. What is your compliance? Are you certified by ISO? Are you certified by SQF or BRC? These are important questions that we need to ask to our suppliers and audit suppliers as well, which is also very important. That's under approved supplier program requirement of SQF. Non-conforming product and equipment. So from time to time, when we make productions, the production specifications, they do not match customers' specifications. So that is why it's called non-conforming product. So that may not be there may be a sellable product, but they may not be sellable to your customer perhaps. Or that's actually you produce it, that doesn't meet any standard, then how are you going to handle the non-conforming product, for example? So non-conformity is a little wide. It's a very wide concept. Anything can be non-conforming in terms of it is specifications, it is look, it is packaging, its ingredients, and other details, for example. So the system that we need to have as to how to handle non-conforming products, what's going to be the steps, investigations, and so on. Rework, sometimes we need to rework based on our production. Maybe that is the food, maybe that's the packaging that we are handling. And if there is a need for corrective action for improvement, then we need to also make sure when we need to take corrective action, what's going to be the criteria. So all these procedures needs to be written down so that it can be followed by team members in the organization. I talked about internal audits in a minute ago. So internal audits can be auditing your department, but ideally, which what we see in the marketplace in practice is cross audits. So sales department audits production department audits purchasing department audits marketing department. A fresh face, new mind. So different way of looking things is very important for continuous improvement when it comes to internal audits. Also recalls and withdrawals. From time to time we hear in the news certain product needs to be recalled. Maybe that's a vegetable, maybe that's a processed food. So what is going to be the steps that we need to be taken as for recalls and withdrawals? That's actually what it is referring to. As well as training. So training is critical. I'll talk more about training in a minute as well. So training is important for our team members to understand the expectations of our quality management system in place. So in this case, we are referring to SQF. It is also important to make sure our team members believe in what we are doing. So it is not only following the rules, we need to believe in what we are doing. It's because it is safety. It's about safety and security of the public for the customers and vendors. And eventually, we are trying to create good products for the good of the public. So we need to believe in what we are doing. So the training is very important. Also, training is important as to remind our team members. Everyone is busy from because of day-to-day operations. So with the help of training, we can remember where we are coming from. What is our policy? What we believe in as an organization when we are producing food and beverage, for example. So that is critical. So also based on FDA requirements, for example, before releasing any new version of any instruction or procedure, there has to be a training. So before even making the new procedure or policy in effect, we need to make sure we train our team members before making it real and official, I must say. Also, SQF also takes us to good manufacturing practices. So that is also an important subject matter that we need to talk about in terms of food and beverage. So actually, good manufacturing practices established by World Health Organization, and it has guidelines, and that is actually formulated by the World Health Organization. And in different countries, there are different authorities to actually enforce the requirements of good manufacturing practices. For example, in the United States, FDA is the body that actually enforces good manufacturing practices with audits, with guidelines, and other instructions. So any organization, you could be a manufacturer, processor, packager in food industry or other industry that as I listed in my slide, actually take actions to comply with good manufacturing practices. And there are certain requirements of good manufacturing practices, as it's called GMP in short. So training is very important, as I was actually talking about a minute ago in the scope of SQF. So the trained staff and efficient staff also they have to follow your records, your instructions based on your quality management system in manufacturing for manufacturing processes. Facilities must be cleaned, and it has to have high standards of hygiene. So it also touches to the maintenance management in a way. So maintenance is important for good manufacturing practices, as well as SQF, as well as ISO 22000. It is because it actually about the hygienic environment of your operations, of your organization while you are producing food. And there are different type of maintenance operations as we know it. In the marketplace, we see many organizations implement periodic, preventive, and predictive maintenance management operations. So that is important to have these procedures and operations in place to make sure our facilities are clean and it has hygienic environment for food and beverage processing. Temperature and humidity control is very important. So we are dealing with food and beverage. In that sense, we need to make sure the temperature, the air quality, as well as the humidity has to be in certain limits. That's actually reasonable and based on our quality management system. Also, type of the food and beverage that we are handling with. So different organizations use different ways to monitor temperature. You may be monitoring manually. You may automate it. There are different ways to do it, but that is actually it's critical. Also, we need to make sure we have policies and procedures in place if there is any temperature problem, there is any humidity problem, anything is out of range, it's too hot, it's too cold, what do we do? So these steps also need to be clearly spelled out and written in our procedures as well, in our record keeping system. There are also standard operating procedures, but especially for the food industry, there is sanitation standard operating procedures. I'll talk about it in a minute to make sure each step is actually being followed in the organization, so that the work environment is safe and the instructions are followed accordingly, according to the SOP documents and requirements. Manufacturing process must be recorded. That is for the traceability purposes, so that we know what type of ingredients that we use, where they are coming from, who are the suppliers, when they delivered it, when did we process it, and when did we actually package it and ship it out. So that needs to be recorded, including manufacturing process records, as well as packaging and logistics as well. So distribution is also important. After production, where do we distribute our food? So sometimes, as we see in the marketplace, most of the manufacturers, they have distribution arms. They have distribution channel partners or wholesalers, for example. So where do we distribute? How long they have been keeping in their organization, at their facilities? When do they ship it out? We also need to follow this out in terms of traceability. And if there is any deviation from the standard operating procedures, then it must be investigated and recorded. And again, it touches to our record keeping process. When do we need to investigate? How do we set how do we set our production specifications, and what is actually deviation that we need to clearly define based on our operations? Complaints are very important. Well, complaints are important for, first of all, for safety and security of the public, and for our team members and anyone getting close to our food products. Also, it is important for continuous improvement. Every single complaint coming from our customers is an opportunity for actually continuous improvement. That is actually how we should be looking at it. In terms of requirements of good manufacturing practices, I divided in two, as for good manufacturing practices and also sanitation standard operating procedures, SSOPs, as it is shortened. So in terms of good manufacturing practices, the premises, the equipment, the facility needs to be clean, and it has to be cleaned periodically, and it has to be maintained well. So I always recommend a proactive maintenance approach for good manufacturing practices, compliance purposes, as well as having a safe, clean, and hygienic work environment. In addition to the place, also the personnel, our team members, they also have to follow processes to make sure they also clean their hands. They also follow hygiene requirements based on our SOPs. The air quality as well as humidity is critical in a food and beverage environment, as well as storage, especially when we are transporting. That's why having the vehicles, especially the fleet, to make sure they have the storage, to make sure that the temperature that is actually how it is supposed to be for the food and beverage that we are delivering. Laboratories are very important. So in food and beverage industry, there are a lot of tests going on. So the tests may be done for the raw materials. Tests are done for the production, as well as it is done for the certification purposes. So we need to make that actually helps us make sure we actually follow the policies and procedures in place. Also, it helps us understand how good is our product if it is based on the specifications. Also helps us understand how we can improve our business processes when we are manufacturing food. So in that sense, the lab records, keeping the lab records, analyzing them, as well as being able to audit them and investigate them when there is a need, is critical based on good manufacturing practices. Standard operating procedures, especially for sanitation purposes, SSOPs, they are really detailed in terms of how do we clean the production floor, how do we clean our machinery for sanitation purposes, the shop floor, as well as the work environment, the facilities. So these SSOPs, as to you can think of it as work steps, step by step. How do we actually make sure we have a clean and sanitized work environment in terms of production floor, in terms of machinery, equipment, and other items that we are using in our facility. So until now, we talk about ISO 22000 on a high level. We also talk about SQF and SQF requirements on a high level. Especially, it's very common in North America in food and beverage industry when it comes to safety as well as quality of food and beverage operations. Also, we talk about good manufacturing practices on a high level, where it is coming from, and what type of requirements it has, and some details as to how to follow good manufacturing practices on a high level. Now, let's talk about what type of compliance challenges are there in food and beverage industry, based on feedback we have been getting from our food and beverage customers, based on our observation. And let's learn about what are the top 7 compliance challenges. So the first challenge is leadership and management commitment. Some organizations, when we talk about quality management, they believe in it. The leadership believes in it. It's a mindset, in a way, to make sure company is also always forcing itself to improve business processes. So that is continuous improvement. So as long as leadership believes in it, then it is easier to get heavy leadership in place and management commitment. Some organizations take these quality management standards that we talk about as a process, just a process. So they have to comply because it is mandatory. That's why they comply. So when that is the mindset, it is difficult to have team members believe in the cause. The cause is basically to make sure we deliver safe and secure products we produce in a safe and secure environment for the good of the public. So most of the time there is a challenge in the marketplace as to lead the teams to make sure they actually comply with quality management systems, as well as they go towards the right direction as an organization. Paperwork management, paperwork and record management is a challenge. So all of the operations that is happening in the food and beverage industry, if you are producing, say, if you are producing soda, if you are let's say processing vegetables, for example, whatever that may be, you need to keep records of every single test that you are taking, every single action. So the paperwork may be overwhelming for organizations sometimes. So record keeping is a big challenge in the marketplace operationally, and the companies are they are having a hard time in terms of keeping the records at that moment and retrieving the records. That's another challenge. So you may be writing on a piece of paper as a record of production, but when it comes to retrieving that document 3 months later, 1 year later, 3 years later, that is a big challenge. We know many companies complying on paper, and when it is time for audit, for example, and when they need to retrieve the documents, records, they go to archive, they try to find the quality control documents, the laboratory records, manufacturing records. It is hard to find it. Sometimes it's almost impossible, especially the later is a document that you're asking is more difficult to find. So the record keeping is a big problem, and it's actually the root cause of many different problems moving forward. So if you don't have a strong record keeping system, it's very difficult to make right decisions, managerial decisions, because you don't have enough evidence to make right decisions. Also, if there is any problem in terms of what you produce, especially in the food and beverage industry, you need to make sure there is traceability in place, so you can trace the source of the problem, where it is coming from, where the material is coming from, the raw material coming from. So that is why it is important, and that's that's number 2 after leadership in terms of top compliance challenges. Number 3, corrective action. So we take corrective actions in any organization, especially in food and beverage organization, to improve our business processes. Why do we need to improve? We need to improve to make sure we create a safe and secure work environment. Also, we produce in a more productive way, more efficient way. That is why we need to take corrective actions for continuous improvement. However, if it actually touches to the number 2, if you don't have enough records to analyze for corrective actions, if you cannot find the root causes while you are doing the analysis in the scope of corrective actions, it is difficult to take corrective actions because you cannot gather the data. Either you're on paper or the data, as we call it, unstructured, they're in different departments. So corrective action management is another challenge. Test and action follow-up management. So you may assign one of your team members to take action. Let's say getting a training, for example, a certain in the scope of certain corrective action, or let's say put in additional SOPs for cleaning work environment, for example. You may assign at that moment, but follow-up is a challenge, as we've seen in the marketplace. Sometimes it is forgotten. Sometimes it is not followed up because of other tasks at in hand. So following up tasks and actions is a big challenge in the marketplace, as we see in food and beverage industry. Getting feedback, handling feedback, and studying lessons learned is another top compliance challenge in the marketplace. So what do we mean by feedback? Feedback may be a customer complaint, that may be a suggestion, that may be a result of audit, for example. So you are getting information back, feedback from other parties to understand how you are doing. So the idea is to basically get in the feedback, understanding how you are doing, and then finding ways to improve it for continuous improvement. So many companies struggling to get feedback from customers, even in the form of customer complaint. Also, many companies, as we see in the food and beverage industry, they have difficulty getting suggestions from different parties, from suppliers, from from customers, from team members. Also, handling incidents is also an important lesson learned in that scope. And you may handle the incident, you may maybe trace it, but do you really study? Do you really find the lessons learned? And if you really share it with the team members, that is another challenge. Some of the organizations, they find the root causes, they have a lesson learned, but they don't share it with other team members. So it is also important to explain what really happened, the findings, the root causes, and explaining team members that why that problem or incident happened and what type of corrective actions are taken so that it will never happen again. This communication is very rare in the marketplace, even internally, and that is also a challenge for organizations to actually implement. Audits are critical, number 6. When I say audits, I'm referring to internal, external, and certification or surveillance audits, for example. So internal audits are actually performed by our own team members. So technically, in any quality management system, ISO, SQF, BRC, you name it, if we are auditing ourselves, and if we try to find ways to improve our business processes, and if we really find a way to improve our business processes, quality management system is working, meaning you are forcing yourself to improve your business processes. You believe that there is always a room for improvement. You keep auditing, cross-auditing your team members, your departments, they cross-audit each other to improve business processes. And you take corrective actions for better, safer, and more secure work environment and food and beverage products. That means quality management system is working. But if you don't have the internal audits in place, then you're just waiting for external audits once in a year or twice in a year. Then quality management system is working, but you're not really pushing yourself to improve your business process. Then you're not really making sure that often, periodically, to make sure everyone is following in the organization safety and security procedures that you have in place as part of your compliance and quality management requirements. And also, the certification audits are actually the final audit. That's the audit that's actually performed by audit bodies, and they are basically auditors specialize in auditing organizations for certification purposes. But until that moment, organizations in food and beverage industry, they have to make sure they actually perform internal audits and they take corrective actions to improve business processes. If you do it on a regular basis, then having certification audit is not going to be big of a challenge. That is important, but it will not be that challenging because you are performing it on a regular basis. So in that scope, audit management and performing audits periodically is a big challenge. It's one of the top compliance challenges that we see in the marketplace. And finally, organizations may lose sight of the quality management requirements sometimes. Everyone is busy because of customers are calling. Everyone is busy because of vendors are calling. Sometimes logistic issues, sometimes other problems happening in the organization, which is normal, we see it all the time. But once the organization lose sight of quality management standard, that is a big challenge. As first of all, it has companies liable for the safety and security of the food that's actually delivering to the public. So there is liability. Also, customer complaint issues, as well as customer satisfaction issues, as well as lack of audits and corrective action issues will naturally arise. So that is another compliance challenge as we see in the marketplace, as to lose sight of quality management standard. So what can we do to overcome these compliance challenges? So we have some ideas that we like to share with you. I like to share with you, and hopefully it'll be helpful, and you'll find it to be helpful and informative in your organization. So one of them is actually strategic management. So we need to analyze our corporate needs. We need to make sure what we need to be doing in terms of complying with ISO 22000 or SQF. It cannot be just because I have to comply. It has to be also taking our company to the next level. We have to force ourselves for continuous improvement. So we have to set goals and directions. So it actually touches to leadership part of the challenges that I was talking about in my previous slide. So we have to have leadership in place, and we have to have our direction in place so that our efforts are actually going towards the right direction, so we can get positive results. That is basically what we mean by strategic management. Change management. So when we set goals And when we have a quality management system in place, naturally, we'll have resistance in the organization. That is inevitable. So there is an old way of doing things in the organization. Now you're implementing ISO 22000 or you're implementing SQF. That is actually going to be difficult for some team members to adopt. So we have to make sure we communicate the benefits of compliance to our team members so that they can follow ISO 22000 requirements. They can follow SQF requirements. Not only because we have to comply, it is because these compliance requirements, these quality management systems, designed to help our company for continuous improvement. We'll keep improving our operations for safety, for security, and to be more efficient and productive. And naturally, we'll be more competitive in the marketplace. That is why training actually is very important for team members, especially periodic training, so that we can actually visit fundamentals of quality management. We can visit fundamentals of continuous improvement, so that team members can refresh their minds, so nobody can lose sight of the quality management system that we are following. Performing internal audits are critical, as I mentioned earlier, for continuous improvement. And the last item is technology. So we need to get rid of all paper-based tasks. We should reduce paper consumption. We should reduce paper-based operations. And as much as possible, we need to digitize our business processes, and we need to automate to get rid of mundane tasks. There are many different technologies in the marketplace, but as long as you're on paper, you don't have the oversight. You don't know who is doing what. It is hard to analyze the performance of team members or activities. It is hard to take corrective actions because evidence is on paper, and it is very difficult to locate the paper in archives. So that may be quality control records, that may be manufacturing records. We have to digitize it. We have to have the visibility in a safe and secure environment in our company's technology system or IT system accordingly. And we need to collaborate with our team members. So especially nowadays, because of COVID-19, many organizations, they work remotely, or they have a hybrid model, as for sometimes working from home, sometimes working from office or work environment. So the collaboration is critical, and having tools to make sure we are in touch with our team members when needed is also very helpful. So that collaboration helps us improve our communications internally, also helps us take corrective actions accordingly for continuous improvement. Another important thing is to basically create a digital corporate memory. So as per good manufacturing practices require, as per SQF, as per ISO 22000, we have to keep our records, and these records, they have to be in a way that we organize them and we class them in a way that we can actually search anytime we need to, we can retrieve them anytime we need to, and we can analyze them with reports anytime we need to. So regardless of who is operating the quality management system, this digital corporate memory helps organizations access data, the knowledge that we have been accumulating as an organization anytime needed. So that is another important idea to be considered to create digital corporate memory. Also, this is also another idea from our organization. So we create these proactive quality management framework, and we basically put it in 3 pieces. So the first piece is actually assurance. So we have the quality assurance system in place, whether we are complying with ISO 22000 or SQF, or we are complying with good manufacturing practices. So we have assurance in place, and if we can digitize it as much as possible, that is the first step. Simultaneously, we have to have controls in place. These controls in place to make sure our production is actually following our safety guidelines. But we cannot only think of it only from the manufacturing point of view. We also need to think about our administrative operations, administrative agent sales operations, marketing operations, our communications, our purchasing operations. We have to have controls in place, and these controls can easily be digitized and easily can be reported if there is a need. So that is the second piece of our framework, as we call it, proactive quality management framework. To be proactive, we also need to be following certain predictive technologies. So smart sensors are in the marketplace right now. They're not really expensive, to be honest with you. So putting smart sensors in place in food and beverage industry is a great idea, and it's actually very, very helpful in terms of being predictive. You know, you can remotely monitor temperature, you can remotely monitor humidity before without being there physically. So that's also very helpful. And finally, how to use technology for quality management. So there are different technologies in the marketplace. As you notice, some of our ideas that we share, technology is the last item that we need to follow. So it all starts with leadership. It all starts with setting the right goals and directions from the leadership and management point of view, followed by having the documentation and records in place. That is critical. And based on our experience, record keeping is the backbone of any quality management system, whether you are complying with ISO 22000, whether you are complying with SQF or BRC. So once you have that document management quality, controlled document management system in place digitally, that is a big step in terms of managing your quality management system with technology, basically. And then it is also followed by using different technologies. Cloud technology is here accessible. We can access our data information anytime from anywhere, whether you are working from work, whether you are working from office, you can access it with the help of cloud technology. Emails, as we all use it. The problem with emails nowadays is just too many email traffic. It's just the email traffic is too often and too much traffic going on. It is hard to manage sometimes. So that is a challenge, but at the same time, we use it all the time. That is practical. Instant messaging is very helpful in the form of collaboration, as I mentioned in my previous slide, so that we can be in touch with our team members. Video conferencing is also very helpful in terms of working remotely and sharing information for making managerial decisions for correct directions is critical. Also, we need to make sure any system that we are using, it actually is safe and secure technologically. We have our passwords in place. Passwords are changed periodically. We have our encryption in place so that without decryption, it's not easy for someone to access our data. That is also important. And there are other cybersecurity steps that we need to be taken accordingly. And sharing files and other specialized software systems also can be really helpful managing quality management operations in food and beverage industry. And finally, let's think about digital transformation a little bit. It is basically adapting your organization's strategy and structure to capture opportunities enabled by technology. Meaning, in the quality management world, in food and beverage industry, if we can adapt our organization and if we can benefit from the technology, we can easily increase customer satisfaction. We can easily have a safer, more secure work environment in terms of manufacturing food and beverage in this competitive marketplace. Now we come to the Q&A session. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to address.
Thank you, Kevin. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And just a reminder, everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. We'll start with the questions that came in prior to the start of the webinar. The first being, could you explain how to overcome internal resistance in quality management?
Thank you very much. That's an important question. So change management is very important in quality management. So when we have quality management in place, it's a new day. Now you are actually improving your business processes. Now you're gonna follow the guidelines that you are setting up based on customer satisfaction, based on having safe and secure environment. So in terms of change management, setting goals, common goals in the organization and communicating with team members is critical. So followed by other change management principles, having internal wins in the teams, core believers, especially management team, they are very important, so they can also influence their team members is critical. Management buy-in is critical. Also, I always recommend training, periodic training, to make sure everyone understands the importance of quality management, and also everyone understands management is all in when it comes to implementing quality management system, whether that's ISO 22000, SQF, or BRC.
And we have another. How should we decide which quality management system, ISO, SQF, and so on, to use at our company?
Okay, that's also a great question. So I talked about earlier ISO 22000 or SQF, and also there is also BRC, very similar to SQF, but managed by a different regulatory body. That's a good question. So which one are we going to comply with? These are quality management systems, right? So that depends on actually the market that you are in. So for example, that may be the market that you're in terms of region, or that may be the market you're in based on your customers' requirements. So in North America, we see a lot of SQF requirements, for example. That's a common North American food and beverage requirement. Yes, there are also BRC, British Retail Consortium requirements as well as we see it, but SQF is very common. BRC, we see it mostly in Europe and some in North America, for example. So these are geographical observations as we see. But the real decision is made by your customer's requirements. So customer is important, and your customer's expectations may be based on SQF or maybe ISO, then you follow accordingly.
And we have one more. How should we prepare for audits, internal or external?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So in terms of preparing for audits, especially for internal, we need to make sure we follow our internal policies, procedures, and guidelines. So in our documents, we clearly state how we're going to do our job, the tasks, the steps that we'll be taking. So we need to put them together, put them right in front of us, go through them, and we need to make sure we follow these instructions step by step. That is important. And as long as we do this periodically, we follow the instructions accordingly, we'll be ready for internal audits anytime. As for external audits, that basically depends on the internal audit performance. As long as we perform our internal audits periodically, external audits not going to be that challenging actually. So how do we schedule it? How do we do it? We always recommend the cross audits, sales audits, production department audits, purchasing department. So that type of cross department audits are very helpful for improvement.
Perfect. And that looks like all the questions we have. So give me one moment as I take back screen control and close out the webinar.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. And as a final reminder, don't forget to register for Virtual Empower to learn how to extend the value of your Sage ERP on May 4th through 6th. The registration link will be included in the webinar follow-up email. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.